The year is 1473 before the Common Era. 6 years after Pharaoh Thutmose II drew his final breath and left Egypt trembling between glory and collapse. Thebes, the greatest city on earth, where temples scrape the sky and gold flows like the Nile itself, where 300,000 souls wake each morning beneath the shadow of monuments that will stand for millennia, where the air tastes of incense and ambition and fear. But this morning the air tastes different. Jehuti stands in the Hall of Justice, and for the first time in his 29 years, he understands what it means to be powerless. He is not poor. He is a royal scribe keeper of grain records for the palace itself. 12 deben of gold per year, enough to feed his family, clothe him. His children dream of a modest tomb when his time comes. Enough to believe until this moment that he lives in a civilization governed by reason. 3 judges sit before him on elevated thrones. They wear the masks of Anubis jackal-headed god who weighs hearts against feathers in the afterlife. Their faces are hidden. Their voices emerge from behind bronze and wood like proclamations from the divine itself. Between Jehuti and these masked arbiters of justice stands his wife, Hinot Mir, 22 years old, mother of 3, the finest weaver of linen in 6 districts, a woman whose hands can transform thread into patterns so intricate that merchants from Canaan pay premium prices. A woman who until 2 weeks ago contributed 40% of their household income. A woman who stands accused of adultery. Her hands are bound behind her back with papyrus rope. The fibers have embedded into swollen flesh. She has not eaten in 4 days. The accusation alone strips away all rights, all protections, all presumption of innocence. Egyptian law is clear on this point. A woman accused is already condemned. The trial is merely theater. The chief judge speaks. His voice echoes in the stone chamber, like the voice of judgment itself. Jehuti, son of Nachman, your wife stands accused by your own brother Amenhotep of violating Ma'at through Congress with the potter Nacht Amun. 2 witnesses have testified under oath. Physical evidence has been presented. Do you contest these facts? Jehuti's throat is dry. He has rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times since the arrest. He has spent 5 deben, nearly half his annual savings, on a lawyer who promised to navigate the complexities of Egyptian jurisprudence. That lawyer stands beside him now, and Jehuti can feel the man's resignation like heat from a dying fire. I contest the interpretation of facts, honored judges, Jehuti says. His voice does not shake. He will not give them that satisfaction. My wife is innocent. The witnesses are compromised. The evidence is fabricated. I know this because I know the man who fabricated it. My brother. The judge tilts his masked head. You accuse your own brother of perjury. I accuse him of vengeance. He propositioned my wife 2 years ago. She refused him. This is his revenge. Silence fills the chamber like water filling a tomb. The second judge speaks now. His voice is older, rougher. Did your wife tell you of this proposition at the time it occurred? She did. And did you report your brother's behavior to authorities? I did not. It was a family matter. I believed I had resolved it through private conversation. I see. So we have only your word that this proposition occurred, and your wife's word. Yes. The word of a man defending his property, and the word of a woman accused of adultery, neither admissible under law. The third judge leans forward. Let us examine the evidence. Amenhotep has testified that he witnessed your wife meeting privately with the potter Nacht-Amun on 5 occasions during the months of Peret. He has provided specific dates and locations. His slave Kenti has corroborated this testimony, stating that he delivered messages between the accused and the potter. An ostracon bearing a love poem was discovered hidden among your wife's possessions. The handwriting has been examined. It does not match your hand or your wife's. The potter Nacht-Amun, when questioned, admitted to having sold pottery to your household on 2 occasions, confirming prior contact. What evidence do you present to refute this? Jehuti's lawyer steps forward. The man's name is Ptah-Shepsis, and he has 30 years of experience in Egyptian courts. He knows every procedure, every precedent, every pathway through the labyrinth of law. And he knows, as Jehuti is beginning to understand, that none of it matters. Honored judges, Ptah-Shepsis says, I call 3 witnesses to testify to the character and conduct of the accused. Hanut Mahit, neighbor and friend. Baki merchant who purchases the accused's woven goods, and Mutemwe, a companion since childhood. The chief judge raises one hand. Of these three witnesses, how many are men? One honored judge, the merchant Baki. And what is his relationship to the accused's husband? They have conducted business together for 6 years. Then he has material interest in the outcome of this trial. His testimony carries conflict of interest. Dismissed. Of the remaining two witnesses, both are women. Under the reforms of Year 2 of the Regency, female testimony in adultery cases carries no weight unless corroborated by two male witnesses of unblemished character and no material connection to the accused or accuser. Do you have such witnesses? Ta Shepsis's shoulders sag. I do not honor judge. Then we cannot hear testimony from Henut Mehit or Mutamwia. Do you have other evidence to present? The lawyer produces a papyrus scroll. I have here an analysis of the handwriting on the ostracon in question. A scribe of 20 years' experience has compared it to known samples of Amenhotep's hand. The letter forms the pressure patterns. The spacing all suggests the ostracon was written by the accuser himself. Has this scribe been certified by the temple as an expert in forgery detection? He has not honored judge, but his experience, inadmissible. Egyptian law requires certification for expert testimony. This is not negotiable. Is there anything else? Jehuti cannot remain silent any longer. He steps forward despite his lawyer's restraining hand. Honored judges, I am her husband. I know my wife. I know her character, her habits, her movements. She has never been unfaithful. She has never had opportunity or desire. My brother is a liar and a gambler who owes 40 daben to creditors who threatened to sell him into slavery. He fabricated this accusation for money. The law allows him to receive 10% of any assets seized from a convicted adulteress. He stands to gain 4 daben from my wife's conviction, 4 daben to pay his debts while my wife suffers for a crime she did not commit. The chief judge's voice cuts through Jehuti's words like a blade through papyrus. The court recognizes your passion, Jehuti, but passion is not evidence. Your testimony regarding your wife's fidelity is inadmissible. You have material and emotional interest in the outcome. Your brother's financial situation, even if accurately described, does not constitute proof of perjury. The law is clear. 2 male witnesses have testified to specific acts of adultery. Physical evidence supports their claims. The accused has no admissible defense. We find Henut Mir guilty of adultery with Nakdamun. She is sentenced to 15 days of purification in the House of Correction beneath Karnak Temple, followed by lifetime servitude to the temple. Her property is forfeit to the state, with 10% allocated to the informant as prescribed by law. Nakdamun, as co-conspirator, is sentenced to immediate execution by sword. This court is adjourned. The gavel falls, the sound echoes. Henut Mir's knees buckle. Jehuti catches her before she hits the stone floor. The guards pull him away. She is already not his wife anymore. She is property of the state, temple property. She belongs to the gods now, and the gods have no mercy. In the corridor outside the Hall of Justice, Jehuti confronts his brother. Amenhotep is 25 years old. He makes pottery that no one wants to buy. He drinks palm wine until he cannot stand. He gambles on dog races and loses. He owes money to half the merchants in Thebes. And now he has destroyed Jehuti's family to pay those debts. You did this, Jehuti says. Not a question, a statement of fact. Amenhotep will not meet his eyes. The court decided, not me. You lied under oath. You forced your slave to lie. You created false evidence. You sent an innocent woman to hell because you couldn't handle rejection. She should have been nicer to me. I'm family. You're a monster. Amenhotep finally looks up. There is something ugly in his face, something that might be guilt twisted into defiance. I'm a survivor. You don't understand what it's like to have nothing while your perfect brother has everything. Good job, good wife, good children. I had to watch you live the life I wanted while I rotted in debt and shame. Well, now you know what it feels like to lose something. Maybe that will make you more generous when your brother needs help. Jehuti's fist connects with Amenhotep's jaw before conscious thought intervenes. The impact sends his brother sprawling across the stone floor. Guards rush forward. Hands grab Jehuti's arms. A captain's voice barks orders. They pull the brothers apart. Amen. Hotep's mouth bleeds. Jehudi's knuckles ache. The captain warns them both. Violence in the Hall of Justice carries penalties. Next time means imprisonment. There will be no next time. Jehudi knows this, because he understands now with awful clarity that the system is not designed to be fair. It is designed to be efficient. It is designed to project power. It is designed to make people afraid. That evening, Jehudi sits in his home with his 3 children. Neferu is 6 years old. Amosi is 4. Sadhathor is 2. They do not understand why their mother is not here. They have been told she is sick. They have been told she will be away for a while. Jehudi knows he will have to tell them their mother is dead. The law requires it. A woman sentenced to temple servitude is legally deceased. Her name cannot be spoken. Her existence cannot be acknowledged. She is erased. But tonight he tells them their mother loves them. He tells them she is the bravest person he has ever known. He tells them that what is happening to her is not justice. Neferu the oldest asks the question that will haunt Jehudi for the rest of his life. If Mama didn't do anything wrong, why is she being punished? Jehudi has no answer, because the truth is too terrible for a 6-year-old to comprehend. The truth is that their civilization, with all its grandeur and sophistication, is built on a foundation of systematic cruelty. The truth is that power protects itself by destroying anyone who threatens it, and women are the easiest targets. The truth is that Egypt is dying, and no one wants to admit it. To understand what happens next, you need to understand what Egypt has become by the year 1473, the Dynasty 18, the Golden Age. The expulsion of the Hyksos invaders 50 years ago still fresh in cultural memory. Military might stretching from Nubia to Syria. Tribute flowing into Thebes from a dozen vassal states. Temples rising higher every year. The pyramids of the Old Kingdom, already ancient, already tourist attractions for Egypt's own citizens who marvel that their ancestors built such wonders. This is the Egypt of legend, the Egypt that will fascinate humanity for 3,000 years after its fall. But beneath the gold and monuments and imperial swagger, something is rotting. 6 years ago, Pharaoh Thutmose II died after a short reign marred by illness. He left behind a 9-year-old son, also named Thutmose, too young to rule. Standard protocol called for a regent. The dead king's wife, Hatshepsut, stepped into that role. She had royal blood herself, daughter of Thutmose I. She knew statecraft. She understood administration. She kept the empire running while the boy king learned his duties. But Hatshepsut did something unprecedented. She did the job too well. For 6 years, she governed Egypt with competence that threatened every assumption about gender and power. She negotiated trade agreements with Syria that doubled revenue from the northern provinces. She commissioned irrigation projects that increased agricultural output by 20%. She resolved a border dispute with Nubian tribes through diplomacy rather than warfare, saving thousands of lives and millions in military expenditure. She proved beyond any possible doubt that a woman could rule as effectively as any man. The priests and nobles who comprise Egypt's power structure understood immediately what this meant. If one woman could rule successfully, others might try. If women could govern kingdoms, why not households? If they could command armies, why not businesses? The entire hierarchy that placed men at the top of every institution suddenly looked arbitrary rather than natural. And so in the year 1473 BCE, Hatshepsut made her move. She declared herself pharaoh, not regent, not placeholder, pharaoh. She commissioned statues showing herself with the ceremonial beard of kingship. She adopted the full royal titulary. She claimed the throne not as caretaker, but as rightful ruler. The backlash was immediate and vicious. The priests of Amun-Ra, the most powerful religious faction in Thebes, convened an emergency council. They could not depose Hatshepsut directly without triggering civil war. She had the support of the military, the bureaucracy, and significant portions of the nobility. But they could send a message. They could demonstrate that this precedent would not be tolerated. They could make women afraid. 2 years before Hinut-Mir's arrest in the year 1475 BCCE, the Council of Thebes enacted a series of legal reforms collectively known as the Women Permission Acts. The laws were framed as protecting Mayat, the cosmic order that prevents reality from dissolving into chaos. Mayhat requires everyone to occupy their proper place in the hierarchy. The sun rises in the east. The Nile floods in summer. Men rule, women obey. This is natural law, divine law, eternal law. Under the new statutes, no woman could engage in commerce without written permission from her husband or father. No woman could travel more than 3 blocks from her home without a male guardian. No woman could testify in court except to corroborate testimony from male witnesses. The penalty for violation ranged from fines to corporal punishment to slavery. Most significantly, the evidentiary standards for adultery accusations changed dramatically. Previously, adultery required caught in the act or confession. Under the reforms, any 2 male witnesses could secure a conviction based on circumstantial evidence. Private conversation with a man not her husband. Laughter in mixed company. Walking alone after sunset. Any of these could be construed as evidence of sexual impropriety. The unstated purpose was obvious. Give men absolute power over women's bodies and lives. Make examples of women who violated the new order. Create an atmosphere of terror that would keep half the population in line. The stated purpose was protecting bloodlines. In a civilization where pharaonic succession connected living rulers to divine ancestors, certainty of paternity was supposedly essential. If women had sexual freedom, children of uncertain parentage might contaminate royal lineages. Mayat would collapse. The universe would end. This reasoning appeared so self-evident to Egyptian jurists that they never questioned whether it was designed from the beginning to justify male control while imposing no equivalent restrictions on male sexuality. Because Egyptian law treated male sexual behavior entirely differently, a man could have relations with slaves, servants, prostitutes, or secondary wives without legal consequence. His primary wife could not protest without risking accusation of disobedience itself a punishable offense. But if she spoke privately with a man not her husband, she could be charged with adultery based purely on inference. The asymmetry was total and deliberate. Egyptian legal philosophy held that men's extramarital activities did not threaten Mayat because men could not become pregnant. No bloodline confusion resulted. Women's extramarital activities, even potential activities, even appearance of potential activities, constituted cosmic violations because any resulting pregnancy would introduce uncertainty into family lines. By this logic, a man visiting a brothel was exercising natural prerogative. A woman smiling at a merchant was committing civilizational treason. The economic impact was catastrophic. Tax records from the years 1475 to 1473 BCE preserved on papyrus scrolls now held in museum collections show revenue decline of 30% across Thebes. The correlation with the Women Permission Acts is unmistakable. When you eliminate half your workforce from productive economic activity, productivity collapses. Hinut Mir exemplified the pattern. Before 1475, she earned 8 deben per year selling woven goods. She had developed a proprietary technique for dyeing linen with indigo that produced colors more vibrant and longer lasting than standard methods. Merchants from Canaan paid premium prices for her work. She employed 2 apprentices. She contributed 40% of her household's income. After 1475, she needed Jehuti's written permission to sell anything. Most of her customers, unwilling to navigate the bureaucratic complications, shifted their business to male weavers, who produced inferior products at higher prices. Hanut's income dropped to 2 deben per year, and most of that came from irregular charity purchases by neighbors who felt sorry for her. The family's standard of living declined accordingly. Jehuti's salary remained constant at 12 deben, but with Hanut's contribution cut by 75%, household income dropped from 20 to 14 deben annually. They could still eat. They could still maintain their home. But the margin for error disappeared. One bad harvest, one illness, one unexpected expense could push them into debt. This pattern replicated across Thebes, across Egypt. 40% of the economy, the portion generated by female labor, simply evaporated. The government, faced with declining tax revenue, did what governments always do. They raised taxes on those who remained economically productive. Jehuti's tax burden increased from 2 deben to 3.5 deben per year. His take-home income, which had been 10 deben when both he and Hanut worked, fell to 8.5. They were poorer under the new system, despite working just as hard. The only people who benefited were the enforcers, the informants, the lawyers, who navigated the new legal complexities for fees that further impoverished ordinary families. This is what Egypt had become by 1473 BCE, a civilization strangling itself with laws designed to demonstrate power rather than promote prosperity, an empire prioritizing ideological control over economic efficiency, a society where being right mattered less than being powerful, and power flowed exclusively to those born with the correct anatomy. And into this disease system, Amenhotep introduced his poison. He was not an evil man by nature. Understand this. He was a weak man in a system that rewarded cruelty and punished compassion. He was a failure in a culture that defined masculinity through dominance and success. He was desperate in an economy that offered no safety net for those who fell. The pottery business had collapsed. His wares were functional, but artless. In a market glutted with competent craftsmen, competent was not enough. He earned perhaps 3 deben per year, barely subsistence level. He supplemented this through gambling, and like most gamblers, he lost more than he won. By 1473, Amenhotep owed 40 deben to various creditors. Some were merchants who had extended credit. Others were less savory, the kind of men who broke bones when debts went unpaid. They had given him a deadline, 1 month to produce 10 deben as initial payment, or they would petition the courts to have him sold into slavery to satisfy the debt. Egyptian law permitted debt slavery. Once a man owed more than he could pay, creditors could request judicial sale. The debtor would be auctioned to whoever bid highest. The sale price would be distributed among creditors according to seniority. The debtor would serve the purchaser until the debt was satisfied plus interest, which typically meant 10 to 20 years of unpaid labor under conditions that made early death common. Amenhotep knew this. He had watched it happen to others. He knew that in 3 weeks he would either produce money he did not have or spend the rest of his short life in chains. And then he remembered the law. The Women Permission Acts included a provision designed to encourage enforcement. Any person who reported a confirmed adultery case would receive 10% of the convicted woman's seized assets. The reformers intended this as incentive for community monitoring. It became license for false accusation. Hanut Mir's property inherited from her father and accumulated through her weaving business was worth approximately 40 deben. If she were convicted of adultery, her assets would be seized. Amenhotep, as informant, would receive 4 deben. Not enough to clear his debts, but enough to buy time. But there was another angle. One of his creditors, a goldsmith named Ipe, had a daughter of marriageable age. Ipe had indicated during one debt negotiation that he might be willing to forgive a significant portion of Amenhotep's obligation if Amenhotep could facilitate a marriage between Ipe's daughter and a respectable family. Someone like, for instance, Jehudi. If Hanut disappeared, Jehudi would be required to remarry within 3 years under Egyptian law. A widower with 3 children and a stable government position would be an attractive match. If Amenhotep arranged that match, Ipe might forgive 20 deben of debt. And so the plan formed, not all at once, not as a coherent conspiracy, but piece by piece over weeks of desperate calculation. Amenhotep convinced himself that destroying his brother's wife was not merely permissible but necessary. He started by creating the physical evidence. The ostrakhan, the pottery shard bearing a love poem, was the easiest part. Amenhotep knew poetry. He had memorized verses from the love songs of Papyrus Harris while courting women who rejected him. He copied one such poem onto a shard of broken pottery using his left hand to disguise his natural script. The poem read, "My heart beats only for the hands of the potter. Your lips taste of the Nile at sunrise. When you touch me, the world becomes temple, and we become gods." It was derivative and melodramatic, but authentic to the genre. He folded it carefully, and through a servant he bribed with 1 deben he could not afford, had it placed in Hanut's clothing chest. Next came the witnesses. His slave Kenti was Nubian, 30 years old. He had been captured during a border raid when he was 15 and sold to Amenhotep's father. Upon the father's death, Kenti became Amenhotep's property. Under Egyptian law, a slave's testimony was admissible in court, though worth less than a free man's. Hotep beat Kenti with a reed until the man's back opened in bloody furrows. Then he offered a choice. Testify that you saw Hanut meeting privately with the potter Nachdamun, or I will beat you every day until you die. Kenti chose testimony. The second witness required more finesse. Amenhotep approached a neighbor named Panefer, a man of 50 years who drank heavily and lived on a small pension from his days as a temple guard. Amenhotep loaned Panefer 2 dibben against future testimony. Not explicitly, just a loan between neighbors. But Panefer understood. When the time came, he would remember seeing Hanut and Nakdamun laughing together at the market eyes meeting in ways that suggested intimacy. The story was fabricated. Hanut had purchased pottery from Nakdamun twice in 6 years. Both transactions were witnessed by other customers and involved no private conversation. But memory is malleable, especially when lubricated with debt and alcohol. Panefer would remember what he needed to remember. Finally, Amenhotep went to the courts and filed his accusation. The chief scribe who recorded the complaint looked at him with something like pity. "You understand," the scribe said, "that accusing a family member carries social consequences. Your brother will hate you. Your family will be divided." "I understand," Amenhotep said, "but Ma'at demands it, justice demands it." The scribe wrote the accusation in careful hieratic script. Hanut Mir, wife of Jehuti, daughter of Nachtmin, accused of adultery with Nacht-Amun Potter based on testimony of Amenhotep and corroborating witnesses. 3 days later, temple guards arrested Hanut while she was drawing water from the neighborhood well. They did not tell her the charges. They did not allow her to return home. They bound her hands and walked her through the streets to the Hall of Justice, where she would remain in a holding cell until trial. Her children watched her being led away. Neferu cried. Amosi asked why the men were hurting Mama. Sat Hathor, too young to understand, simply waved. Hanut never saw them again. The trial lasted 3 days. The first day was accusation. Amenhotep presented his testimony with well-rehearsed grief. "I did not want to do this," he said. "She is family. But Ma'at requires truth regardless of personal cost." He described 5 alleged meetings between Hanut and Nakhtamun. He provided dates, locations, times. He wept as he spoke. The judges listened impassively. Kenti testified next. He described his role as message carrier. He claimed Hanut had asked him to deliver notes to the potter. He provided details that sounded plausible because Amenhotep had beaten them into his memory. Panefer testified last. He said he had seen Hanut and Nakhtamun at the market. They were laughing, he said. Their eyes held too long. He knew sin when he saw it. The second day was defense. Jehudi tried everything his lawyer suggested and several things the lawyer advised against. He called his witnesses. The judges dismissed them. He challenged the handwriting on the ostracon. The judges ruled it inadmissible. He pleaded for his wife's character. The judges explained that character was not evidence. By midday of the second day, Jehudi understood he had already lost. The third day was sentencing. The judges conferred briefly. The chief judge pronounced the verdict. Guilty. The sentence followed protocol established by the Women Permission Acts. 15 days of purification. Lifetime temple servitude. Property seizure. And then they brought out Nakhtamun. The potter was 28 years old. He had no idea he was involved in any of this until the guards arrested him the day after Hanut's trial began. He protested his innocence. He explained that he had sold pottery to many customers, Hanut among them, and remembered nothing unusual about the transactions. The judges did not care. The law was clear. If a woman committed adultery, her partner shared guilt. Both must be punished. But the law treated male and female adultery differently. Nakhtamun was sentenced to immediate execution. No torture, no public humiliation, no prolonged suffering, just a sword to the neck in the courtyard outside the Hall of Justice. It took 5 seconds. One guard held the potter's shoulders. The executioner raised the bronze blade. The blade fell. Nakhtamun's head separated from his body. Blood sprayed across stone. The corpse crumpled. Clean, efficient, merciful by the standards of Egyptian justice. Hanut would receive no such mercy. That evening after the trial, Jehuti sat alone in his home and faced the wreckage of his world. His wife was condemned. His children were orphaned. His brother was a monster. And the system he had believed in, the civilization he had served with pride, had revealed itself as machinery designed to destroy anyone who fell into its gears. He made a decision then, a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would document what happened. He would write everything down. He would create a record that could not be erased. and he would send that record to the highest authorities in Egypt with a demand for reform. Over the next 6 days, while Hanut endured the beginning of her 15-day purification, Jehuti wrote, he filled 6 papyrus scrolls with careful hieratic script. He described the trial in detail. He exposed Amenhotep's motives. He analyzed the legal procedures that made justice impossible. He compiled statistics on adultery convictions that showed a 98% conviction rate regardless of actual guilt. And he wrote a proposal, a detailed reform package that would fix the broken system, require physical evidence for adultery convictions, allow husbands to testify in defense of their wives, permit appeals, create judicial review boards, eliminate financial incentives for accusations, establish penalties for perjury in adultery cases. Simple reforms, common sense reforms, reforms that would save innocent lives without compromising legitimate justice. He sent the document to the palace, to the temple councils, to the provincial governors, to anyone with power to change the system. Every copy was rejected. The response from the palace was polite but firm. Changing adultery law would imply the current law is flawed. This would undermine public confidence in the legal system. Stability requires consistency. The proposal is denied. The temple council's response was harsher. The petitioner questions Ma'at itself. The current law has stood for 2 years and produced order. Order is more important than individual justice. The proposal demonstrates dangerous thinking. The petitioner is warned to cease this line of inquiry. The provincial governors did not respond at all. Jehuti understood then what he had truly lost. Not just his wife, not just his family, but his faith in the system itself. He had believed Egypt was a civilization. He discovered it was a machine. And machines do not care about the people they destroy. The House of Corrections sits 3 levels beneath Karnak Temple. Most tourists who visit the temple complex never know it exists, the maps exclude it. The tour guides do not mention it. It was deliberately hidden when modern archaeological surveys were conducted because revealing its purpose would complicate the narrative of Egyptian civilization as enlightened and advanced. But it exists. The descending stairway is still there, sealed behind a maintenance door that temple workers pass daily without looking. 50 stone steps leading down at a steep angle into bedrock. The air grows cooler with each step. The smell changes from incense and sand to something older and darker. At the bottom, there is a corridor, 15 feet wide, 200 feet long. Oil lamp niches carved into walls at 10-foot intervals, though the lamps have been extinguished for 3,000 years. At 6-foot intervals along both sides doorways. 30 doorways total, each leads to a cell, 10 feet square. 6-foot ceiling too low for anyone above average height to stand fully upright. Iron rings set into walls at heights corresponding to a standing woman's wrists and ankles. A single oil lamp niche, no windows, no ventilation beyond what circulates through the corridor. Temperature constant year-round at 55 degrees, cool enough to make bare skin uncomfortable, but not cold enough to kill. This is where Henut Mir spent 15 days. The guards brought her down the stairs at sunset on the day of her sentencing. She could not see where she was going. They had blindfolded her during transport. They removed the blindfold only after locking her in the cell. The chief priest of the facility, a man named Khonsu, spoke the words prescribed by protocol. You have been convicted of violating Ma'at through adultery. The next 15 days will purify your body and soul through controlled suffering. If you survive purification, you will serve the temple for the remainder of your life. Your name is stricken from all records. Your family is forbidden contact. You are dead to the world above. Do you understand Henut's throat was too dry to speak? She nodded. Good, Khonsu said. Purification begins now. The first punishment was marking. Egyptian law required that adulteresses be permanently identified so they could never hide their crime. The method was specific and brutal. A specialized priest entered, carrying bronze tongs heated in a brazier until they glowed dull red. The purpose was not death, but permanent disfigurement. In a culture where the afterlife required an intact body for the soul's return, deliberate mutilation carried implications extending beyond mortality into eternity itself. 2 temple guards held Henut immobile. The priest spoke a ritual formula asking Amun-Ra to witness that this punishment served divine justice. Then he clamped the tongs onto her nose and twisted, tearing cartilage from bone with a motion that produced a sound Witnesses described as similar to ripping papyrus but wetter. Hanut screamed. The stone walls absorbed the sound. No one above ground heard anything. The pain was not the worst part. The worst part was understanding this was only the beginning. The judges had assigned 15 days. 15 days during which her body would be systematically altered to serve as warning to every woman in Thebes who might consider that her desires mattered more than her duty. Next came the branding. The priest heated a copper tool shaped like a broken heart hieroglyph until it glowed white. He pressed it against Hanut's right cheek, then her left. The smell of burning flesh filled the small cell. Hanut's consciousness flickered. She welcomed the darkness, but the guards had water. They threw it in her face. The priest had instructions. She must remain conscious to understand what was being done to her. The marking took perhaps 10 minutes from start to finish. When it ended, Hanut's face was no longer recognizably hers. The nose was a ruined cavity. The cheeks bore symbols that would never fade. Anyone who saw her would know instantly what she was. Adulteress, violator of Mayat, living lesson in the consequences of female transgression. The guards left her alone then. She lay on the stone floor of her cell and wept. But even weeping was dangerous. Water was precious. She would receive 500 milliliters every 12 hours. Not enough to fully hydrate, but enough to prevent death from dehydration. Every tear was waste she could not afford. The first 5 days focused on hunger purification. Egyptian medical theory held that the organs of digestion were linked to organs of reproduction through channels carrying humors throughout the body. Starving the digestive system would purify the reproductive system, burning away the spiritual pollution that adultery had introduced. Modern medical understanding recognizes something the Egyptians understood through observation but not biochemistry. Starvation produces psychological effects that make victims more compliant for subsequent punishments. After 5 days without food, a person's resistance to pain and capacity for rebellion diminish significantly. Blood sugar crashes create confusion and weakness. The body begins consuming its own muscle tissue. Cognitive function deteriorates. The Egyptians may not have understood the mechanism, but they recognized the pattern. A starved woman was easier to control. Hanut received water on schedule, 500 milliliters at sunrise, 500 milliliters at sunset. Each delivery was accompanied by a reminder. This is mercy. You could receive nothing. Be grateful. By the third day, Hanut stopped trying to speak to the guards. By the fourth day, she stopped moving except when necessary. By the fifth day, she barely registered as conscious. And then she heard the voice. It came from the cell adjacent to hers. A woman's voice barely above a whisper filtering through a crack in the stone wall. You're new. Hanut turned her head. The motion made her dizzy. Who are you? Mutamwia, day 8. Day 8 of what? Day 8 of purification, 3 more days of beating, then 5 days of sun, then it's over. Then comes the rest of your life. How long have you been here in the temple? 3 years, since I was 27. I'll die here, you will too. What was your crime? A bitter laugh echoed through the crack. I had letters from a man I loved before I married. My husband found them. 10-year-old letters, written before I even knew my husband existed. Didn't matter. 2 witnesses said the letters proved I was still seeing this man. I wasn't. But they said I was, and that was enough. Did you tell them the truth? Of course I told them. They didn't care. Truth isn't the point. Control is the point. Breaking us is the point. There must be a way to appeal, to prove innocence. There's no appeal. There's no proof. There's only survival. Some women try to kill themselves during purification. Bash their heads against the walls. The guards stop them. You have to live through this. That's the punishment. Living through it. Hanut closed her eyes. I have 3 children. I know, we all have children, or parents, or someone who loved us. The temple doesn't care. You're not a person anymore. You're an example. An example of what happens when women forget their place. On the 6th day, the hunger purification ended. The guards brought Hanut a small amount of food. Barley meal mixed with water into a paste. Perhaps 300 calories. Enough to restore minimal function, but not enough to restore strength. And then they brought the rods. Days 6 through 10 were designated for pain purification. The method was precise and calculated. Not random violence, but systematic tissue damage delivered with almost surgical precision. The designated priest for this phase was named Seneb. He had trained for 5 years specifically for this role. He knew exactly how hard to strike to cause severe pain and lasting damage without breaking bones or causing immediate death from internal bleeding. The tool was a reed, not a rigid stick, but a flexible rod about 3 feet long and 1 inch in diameter. It had been soaking in salt water for 3 days, which increased its density and made impacts more painful. The targets were specific: lower back, rear thighs, areas with substantial muscle tissue overlaying bone, areas that would hurt with every movement for the rest of the victim's life. 20 strikes per session, 3 sessions per day. The same spots struck repeatedly to prevent healing and create layers of damaged tissue that would never fully recover. Seneb performed this duty without emotion. He did not hate Hanut. He did not enjoy hurting her. He was simply doing his job, a job he had trained for, a job he was good at. On day 7, after the morning beating session, a different man entered Hanut's cell. He was older, perhaps 40. He carried a medical kit made of woven reed. His hands were steady and his eyes were tired. "I am Nebamun," he said, "physician. I'm here to ensure you don't die from infection." He examined the wounds on Hanut's back and legs. He cleaned them with a mixture of honey and ground willow bark. The honey had antibacterial properties. The willow bark contained salicylic acid, a natural pain reliever. But he did not bandage the wounds. He did not apply the natron salts that would accelerate healing. His job was not to heal her. His job was to keep her alive through the purification period without allowing the injuries to fully recover. "Why are you doing this?" Hanut asked. Her voice was barely functional. The combination of dehydration, starvation, and screaming had reduced it to a rasp. Nebamun did not look at her face as he worked. "I'm a physician. This is my assignment. You could let me die. The infections would kill me. You could just not treat them. That's not permitted. You must survive purification. So you keep me alive to suffer more." Nebamun's hands paused. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Something that might have been shame or guilt or simple exhaustion. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's exactly what I do." "Do you have children?" The question seemed to surprise him. "A daughter, 7 years old." "Could you do this to her?" "No." "Then how can you do it to me?" Nebamun finished applying the honey mixture. He closed his medical kit. "Because if I refuse this assignment, they will give it to someone else. Someone who will do worse. Someone who will let women die from preventable infections because he doesn't care. I keep you alive. That's all I can do. I keep you alive. That's not mercy. That's cruelty." "I know." He left without another word. Over the next 3 days, Nebamun came twice daily to monitor Hanut's wounds. He never spoke unless necessary. He performed his duties with mechanical efficiency. But on day 9, something changed. After the evening beating session, after Seneb had delivered his 20 strikes and departed, Nebamun entered to check for complications. He found Hanut curled on the stone floor, not crying because she had no water to spare, for tears just shaking with pain that had become her entire reality. He did his examination, he applied fresh honey mixture, and then before leaving, he did something that violated protocol. He left an extra 50 milliliters of water. Not much, not enough to matter medically, but enough to matter emotionally. A small act of kindness in a place designed to eliminate all kindness. Hanut noticed. She said nothing, but she drank the extra water, and for the first time in 9 days, something other than despair existed in her chest. The next day, she asked Nebamun the question that haunted him. "Why do you do this, really?" He was quiet for a long time. His hands continued their work, checking her back for signs of infection that required intervention. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight that suggested he had asked himself the same question many times. "I'm a physician. I trained at Per Ankh, the House of Life. I took an oath. First, do no harm. But this place makes that oath meaningless. Everything I do here causes harm. Preventing infection extends suffering. Treating injuries enables more torture. I am complicit in every moment of pain inflicted on every woman who passes through here. Then why not refuse? Because refusing means losing my position. It means my family loses income. It means I might face charges of dereliction of duty, and it means this job goes to someone who will do it worse. At least I try to minimize pain. At least I keep detailed records, so someday maybe someone will understand what happened here. Records. I write everything down. Every case, every injury, every woman who dies. Someday someone might read those records and understand that this was wrong. That might matter. Or it might not. Yes, or it might not. On day 10, the beating phase ended. Hanut's back and legs were a mass of bruised, damaged tissue. Nebaman's records written in careful hieratic script on papyrus that would survive 3,000 years described the extent of injury in clinical detail. Subject 2, 847, Hanut. Day 10. Extensive soft tissue damage to lumbar region and posterior thighs. Estimate 70% permanent scar tissue formation. Mobility will be impaired for remainder of life. Pain likely to be chronic. No bone fractures detected. Subject maintained consciousness throughout. Prognosis for survival favorable. Prognosis for recovery, none. Days 11 through 15 constituted exposure purification. The guards brought Hanut up from the cells to the courtyard of Karnak Temple. They bound her to a wooden frame shaped like an X. Her arms were stretched above her head. Her legs were spread and tied at the ankles. She wore only a loincloth. Her mutilated face and branded cheeks were fully visible to anyone entering the temple complex. The frame was positioned where the sun struck directly from 10 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. 6 hours of direct exposure to Egyptian summer sun at temperatures regularly exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The purpose was not just physical suffering from heat and dehydration. The purpose was public humiliation. Hundreds of people passed through the courtyard daily. Priests, worshippers, merchants, tourists from other cities. All of them would see Hanut. All of them would know what she was. All of them would understand what happened to women who violated Ma'at. Some people stared. Some hurried past with averted eyes. Some stopped to explain to their children. That is what happens to bad women. That is why you must be good. On day 13, a man fought his way through the crowd and ran to the frame where Hanut hung. It was Jehuti. He was not supposed to be there. The law forbade family contact with condemned women. But he had bribed a guard. He had risked arrest. He had come to see his wife one last time. Temple guards grabbed him within seconds. But those seconds were enough. Hanut, he said. His voice broke. I'm sorry, I tried everything. They wouldn't listen. I couldn't save you. Hanut's throat was too dry to speak above a whisper. The children, they're safe. I'm taking care of them. I'll tell them about you. I'll make sure they know you were brave, that you were innocent, that what happened to you was wrong. Tell them I love them. Every day, I promise. And the guards pulled Jehuti away. He fought them. He screamed that she was innocent, that the system was corrupt, that someone needed to stop this madness. They dragged him to the temple gates and threw him out. A captain warned him, return again and you will be charged with interfering with lawful punishment. That carries a prison sentence. Jehuti never saw Hanut again. On day 14, something unexpected happened. A woman was brought to the frame next to Hanut's. She was older, perhaps 35. Her skin was lighter than most Egyptians. Her hands bore the calluses of someone who had held weapons. And despite the circumstances, she carried herself with authority. Hanut managed to turn her head. Who are you? The woman's voice was steady despite the heat and pain. I am Tewosret, wife of Pharaoh Seti II, or I was until they decided I was too dangerous. Hanut's exhausted mind struggled to process this. Your royalty. I was, now I'm the same as you, property of the state, example to be destroyed. What did you do? A bitter laugh. I governed Egypt for 2 years while my husband was ill. I did it well. That was my crime. I proved women could rule effectively. The priests and nobles couldn't allow that precedent to stand. So they accused you of adultery. They accused me of adultery with Ursu, a Syrian administrator. We met privately dozens of times, because that's what governance requires. Private meetings with officials. They reinterpreted every administrative conference as a romantic tryst. They found every gift I gave for services rendered and called them tokens of affection. They built a case from legitimate governmental activity by viewing it through the lens of accusation. And your husband? Didn't he defend you? My husband died 3 months ago. That's when they moved against me, while I was still in mourning, before I could consolidate power. They struck when I was vulnerable. What's your sentence? Not servitude. I'm too highborn for that. They can't make me a temple slave without delegitimizing the royal family. So they found another solution. What solution? They're going to seal me in my tomb alive. Hinut stared. Even through her own suffering, the horror of that penetrated. The tomb in the Valley of the Queens, the one I commissioned for my eventual burial. They'll put me inside with 7 days of food and water. Then they'll seal the entrance, plaster over it, paint scenes of my crimes on the outside, and I'll die in darkness while the world forgets I ever existed. That's monstrous. That's politics. I threaten the system. The system eliminates threats. You and I are just data points in a pattern that has been repeating for generations and will continue long after we're gone. Is there no hope? Tawosret was quiet for a moment. Then I'm going to write, on the tomb walls, with whatever I can find. Pottery shards, stones, anything. I'm going to document what happened. My version, the truth. Someday maybe someone will find it. Maybe someone will care. Will it matter? Probably not, but it's all I have left. The ability to tell my story in my own words before silence takes me. On day 15 at sunset, Tawosret was taken away. Hinut watched her go. The former queen walked with her head high, refusing to show fear. The guards led her to a chariot that would carry her to the Valley of the Queens and her living tomb. Hinut never learned what Tawosret wrote on those walls, but archaeologists working in 1917 would discover Kiev 14 Tawosret's tomb and find messages carved into the stone by a woman dying slowly in darkness. The messages read, Day 1. They call me adulteress, but I never touched Ursu, except in greeting. Day 3. Food gone, water low, darkness total, lamp exhausted. Day 7. Water finished, lips cracked. I hear footsteps outside, but no one opens the door. Day unknown. The Syrian did not touch me, but Egypt has consumed me. They call this justice, but the gods see truth. The last message was incomplete. The hand holding the pottery shard had fallen before finishing. Tawosret's mummified body would be found in the tomb. Cause of death, dehydration. Time to death, approximately 2 to 3 weeks. She had survived longer than her captors expected. She had carved her truth into stone, and for 3,000 years, no one read it. On day 15, Hinut was taken down from the exposure frame and returned to her cell. A priest came with water and cloth to clean her. Then the chief priest, Khonsu, entered to deliver her final assignment. You have completed purification. You are now classified as temple property. You will serve in the lowest capacity. You will clean floors, remove waste, prepare bodies for mummification. You will live in quarters designated for the condemned. You will never leave temple grounds. You will never contact family. Your head will be shaved. You will wear gray linen. You will speak only when addressed by priests. Do you understand? Hinut understood. She understood that she had 15 days of life left before entering a living death that would continue until her body gave out. She nodded. Good, Khonsu said. Tomorrow you begin service. In the cell next door, Mutumwia whispered through the crack in the wall. I'm sorry. I hoped they would show mercy, but there is no mercy here. Only survival. Learn to turn off your feelings. Learn to not think about what you lost. Learn to exist without living. That's the only way to endure. Hinut did not respond. She had no words left. She lay on the stone floor and stared at the ceiling and waited for tomorrow. Hinut Mir served the temple of Karnak for 9 years. The work was exactly as described. She cleaned floors on hands and knees with brushes made of reeds. She removed human waste from the embalming chambers, carrying buckets of blood and viscera to disposal pits outside the temple walls. She prepared bodies for mummification by washing corpses and removing organs that would be preserved in canopic jars. She lived in a windowless cell with 5 other condemned women. They received 1 meal per day barley gruel, providing approximately 500 calories, enough to sustain life, but not enough to restore strength. They worked 16-hour shifts. They slept on stone floors with no bedding. 3 of the original women in Hinut's cell died during those 9 years. one from infection that went untreated, one from an accident carrying waste buckets down steep stairs. She fell and broke her neck. One simply gave up, stopped eating, and died after 12 days of voluntary starvation. New women arrived to replace them. The cycle continued. The machine needed bodies to demonstrate its power, and Egypt provided an endless supply of women whose supposed crimes fed the mechanism. Hanut learned to stop thinking about her children. Thinking hurt worse than the physical pain. She learned to perform her duties mechanically, mind disconnected from body. She learned to sleep despite hunger. She learned to endure. But even endurance has limits. In the ninth-year month of Akit, Hanut was 31 years old but looked 50. She had lost 30 pounds. 4 of her teeth had rotted and fallen out. Her back had developed a permanent curvature from years of bending over floors and waste buckets. The injuries from her purification beatings had healed into scar tissue that hurt with every movement. She was carrying waste from the embalming chamber to the disposal pit. The bucket was heavy, perhaps 40 pounds. The path was uneven stone. She had made this walk 10,000 times. This time, halfway to the pit, her heart simply stopped. Not a heart attack in the modern medical sense, just exhaustion. The organ had been pushed beyond its capacity for too long, with inadequate nutrition and constant stress. It quit. Hanut fell. The bucket spilled. She lay on the stone path, unable to move. Another temple worker found her and called for help. They sent for Nebamun. He was still the physician assigned to the House of Correction, 47 years old now, still doing a job he hated, still keeping meticulous records. He came quickly. He knelt beside Hanut and checked for pulse. Very weak, breathing shallow. He recognized her immediately despite the years and the damage. Subject 2847, the woman whose question had haunted him for 9 years. Hanut, he said quietly, can you hear me? Her eyes opened slightly. My children. How old are they now? Nebamun knew the answer. He had followed the family. Professional curiosity or personal guilt, he was never sure which. Neferu is 15, Amos is 13, Sat Hathor is 11. A small smile crossed Hanut's ruined face. Did Neferu learn to weave? I don't know, but I can find out, I promise. Thank you. You were always kind, even when you had to be cruel. I'm sorry. For everything. For all of it. Not your fault. System's fault. Her breathing became more labored. Nebamun recognized the pattern. He had seen it hundreds of times. This was dying. He could do nothing to stop it. He could only witness. Do you want me to try to save you? He asked, knowing the answer but needing to ask. No, please. Let me go. All right. He held her hand. It was the first time in 9 years he had touched a condemned woman with gentleness rather than clinical necessity. Her pulse fluttered, stopped, started, stopped again. It took 4 minutes. 4 minutes from the moment he arrived until the moment Hanut Mir died. She was 31 years old, mother of 3, guild weaver, innocent of every charge brought against her, dead because a weak man needed money and the system gave him tools to destroy innocent people for profit. Nebamun closed her eyes. He sat there for several minutes holding the hand of a dead woman, allowing himself to feel grief he normally suppressed. Then he stood. He had other duties. The machine required his service. But that night alone in his study, Nebamun made an entry in his private journal. The journal he had kept for 12 years. The journal that documented every woman who had passed through the House of Correction under his care. The entry read, Subject 2847, Hanut Mir, wife of Jehudi, convicted year 1473, BC, on fabricated evidence. Served 9 years. Died year 1464 BCE from heart failure, induced by malnutrition and chronic injury. She was innocent. I could not save her. The system killed her as surely as if we had put a sword through her heart. We just took longer. We were more cruel. I have been a physician for 20 years. I have saved hundreds of lives. But I have also participated in this. I have kept women alive so they could suffer longer. I have treated injuries I knew would never fully heal. I have enabled cruelty by providing it with medical supervision. I do not know if the gods will forgive me. I do not know if I will forgive myself. But I write this so that someday someone will know. This was wrong. All of it was wrong, and we did it anyway because the system demanded it. Nebamun would die 7 years later at age 54. Liver disease likely caused by decades of heavy drinking to numb the guilt. His private journal would be buried with him in his tomb. It would be discovered in 1924 during an archaeological excavation. Modern scholars would use it as a primary source for understanding the judicial system of Dynasty 18 Egypt. Hanut's body was wrapped in plain linen. No mummification, no funerary rituals, no canopic jars or shabdi figures or Book of the Dead inscriptions to guide her through the afterlife. Just a simple wrap and burial in the desert beyond the temple walls. Nebamun violated protocol one final time. He placed a small pottery shard in the wrapping. He had scratched 4 words onto it with a stylus. Hanut, mother, weaver, innocent. The shard would be discovered with her remains in 1932. It would be catalogued as artifact number T-2847-A and placed in storage at the Cairo Museum, where it remains today one of 30,000 similar artifacts unremarkable, except to the few scholars who know its story. Jehudi learned of his wife's death 3 days after it occurred. A temple worker he had bribed over the years brought him the news. Hanut had died. She had been buried. It was over. Jehudi was 38 years old. He had remarried 3 years earlier, as the law required. His new wife was the daughter of the goldsmith Ipi, arranged by Amenhotep as partial payment for his forgiven debts. She was a good woman. She cared for his children. He did not love her, but he respected her. His 3 children were growing up. Neferu was 15, beautiful and intelligent, already learning the weaving trade from a master craftsman. Jehudi had apprenticed her to. Ahmose was 13, showing aptitude for mathematics and writing. Sat Hathor was 11, healthy and happy. They knew their birth mother was dead. They had been told she died of fever when they were small. They had no memory of her. Jehudi had never told them the truth. How could he explain that their mother was innocent, that the system had murdered her, that their uncle had betrayed her for money? But on the night he learned of Hanut's death, Jehudi made a decision. He would write everything down, not a petition this time, not a plea for reform, a historical record, a document that told the truth about what happened, a memorial for a woman the state had tried to erase. He wrote for 3 months. He filled 12 papyrus scrolls with careful hieratic script. He told Hanut's story. He described the trial. He exposed the corruption. He analyzed the systemic failures. He included copies of the petitions he had sent to authorities and their rejections. And he wrote about the consequences, not just personal consequences, not just the destruction of his family, but civilizational consequences, economic consequences, the measurable decline of Egypt that had accelerated after the Women Permission Acts. He compiled data, tax records showing revenue decline, census records showing population decrease, trade records showing loss of skilled labor, military records showing difficulty recruiting soldiers because young men were reluctant to marry when marriage could lead to false accusations that destroyed families. He documented 47 similar cases in Thebes alone during the 9 years of Hanut's imprisonment, 47 other women convicted on dubious evidence, 47 other families destroyed. Multiply that across all of Egypt, across all the years since the reforms, and the numbers became staggering. Thousands of women, tens of thousands of family members impacted, entire economic sectors disrupted, all in the name of enforcing Ma'at, maintaining order, protecting bloodlines. But the bloodlines were not protected. The birth rate had declined. Young men delayed marriage or avoided it entirely. Women who did marry lived in constant fear. The atmosphere of terror that was supposed to strengthen social cohesion was actually corroding it. Jehudi titled his work, "Justice Betrayed: How Egypt Destroyed Itself by Destroying Its Women." He did not try to send it to authorities this time. He knew they would not read it. Instead, he made 3 copies. One he kept in his home, one he sealed in a bar and buried beneath his garden, one he placed in his tomb, which he was already preparing, despite being only 38, because he wanted to ensure the document survived. The copy in his tomb would be discovered in 1924 by British archaeologist Howard Carter during a survey of non-royal tombs near the Valley of the Kings. Carter would read it with growing horror. He would translate it. He would publish excerpts in an academic journal. And for the first time in 3,000 years, Hanut Mir's name would be spoken again. But Jehudi did not know any of this would happen. He wrote because he needed to, because silence felt like complicity, because someone needed to say that what happened was wrong, even if no one in his lifetime would listen. The final section of his document addressed his children. It read, "My sons and daughter, if you are reading this, I am dead. I want you to know the truth about your mother. Her name was Hanut Mir. She was the daughter of Nachman, a dye merchant. She was a weaver of extraordinary skill. She was kind and brave and innocent of every charge brought against her. She was accused of adultery by my brother, your uncle Amenhotep. He lied. He fabricated evidence. He destroyed her to pay his debts. The legal system allowed this, no more than allowed. The system encouraged it, made it profitable, made it easy. I tried to save her. I exhausted every legal remedy. I petitioned every authority. I begged for mercy. Nothing worked. The system was not designed to find truth. It was designed to project power and create fear. Your mother suffered for 15 days in ways I will not describe. Then she served 9 years as a temple slave. Then she died at age 31 from injuries and malnutrition. She loved you. Her last thoughts before they took her away were of you. She asked me to tell you she was innocent. She asked me to tell you she loved you. I promised her I would. I have kept that promise. I tell you this not to make you hate Egypt. This is our civilization. These are our people. But civilizations can be wrong. Systems can be corrupt. And when they are good, people must say so, even when saying so accomplishes nothing. The legal system that killed your mother is still in place. It will probably remain in place long after I am gone. It may destroy other families, other mothers, other wives. I could not stop it. But I can tell you this. When systems prioritize order over justice, when they sacrifice individuals to maintain power, when they punish people for political reasons while calling it law, those systems are not worthy of respect. Question authority. Demand evidence. Defend the innocent even when it costs you. And never believe that cruelty is acceptable simply because it is legal. Your mother was murdered by the law. Remember her. Remember what was done to her. And do better than we did. Jehudi lived another 23 years. He died in 1441 BCE at age 61. He was buried in the tomb he had prepared along with his document. His children inherited his property and his beliefs. They told their children about their grandmother. The story passed down through generations, growing vaguer with each telling until it became family legend, disconnected from historical fact. But the document survived. And when Carter found it, the legend became history again. Now we must address the pattern. Because Hanut was not unique. Mutnofret was not unique. Tawoshret was not unique. They were symptoms of a systemic disease that was killing Egyptian civilization from within. The timeline tells a story. 1479 BCE, Pharaoh Thutmose II dies. Hatshepsut begins her regency. 1475 BC, the Women Permission Acts are enacted. Economic productivity begins declining. 1347 BCE, Hatshepsut declares herself pharaoh. Hanut Mir is arrested. The crackdown intensifies. 1346 BC, Hanut dies. The economic decline accelerates. 13458 BCE, Hatshepsut dies. Thutmose III assumes sole power. He continues the restrictive policies. 1425 BCE, economic crisis becomes undeniable. Tax revenues have declined 40% from their peak. The government raises taxes to compensate, further impoverishing the middle class. 1400 BCE, brain drain begins in earnest. Skilled workers, male and female, emigrate to Canaan, Mesopotamia, anywhere that offers more freedom and less oppression. Egypt loses its most productive citizens. 1353 BCE, Akhenaten attempts revolutionary religious reforms trying to reset the system. The reforms fail catastrophically. 1292 BCCE, Dynasty 18 ends, 258 years after it began, 181 years after Hanut's arrest. The dynasty that built the greatest monuments. The dynasty that expelled foreign invaders. The dynasty that expanded Egypt to its maximum territorial extent. This dynasty collapsed not because of external enemies, but because of internal contradictions. Because when you eliminate half your population from productive economic activity, Productivity collapses. Because when you create legal systems that reward false accusations, truth becomes impossible. Because when you prioritize ideological control over practical governance, competent people leave and incompetent yes men remain. Because when you build a society on fear and oppression, that society becomes rigid, unable to adapt, unable to innovate, unable to survive changing circumstances. Modern historians debate the causes of Dynasty 18's decline. They cite economic factors, military overextension, religious upheaval, succession crises. All true, all relevant. But few connect the dots back to the legal reforms of 1475 BCE. Few recognize that systematically destroying your most productive citizens, criminalizing half your population, and creating atmospheres of terror have measurable economic and social consequences that compound over decades into civilizational crisis. The pattern appears throughout history. The Soviet Union, 1922 to 1991. Stalin's purges in the 1930s killed 20 million people, including engineers, scientists, farmers, administrators. The USSR never recovered economically. It collapsed in 1991, 60 years after the purges weakened, by the cumulative impact of destroying its own human capital. Nazi Germany, 1933 to 1945. The persecution and exile of Jewish scientists cost Germany Einstein, Bohr, and dozens of Nobel laureates. The brain drain contributed to Germany losing World War II. Superior Allied science, including the atomic bomb developed partly by exiled German Jews, made military victory possible. Taliban Afghanistan, 1996 to 2001, and 2021 to present. Banning women from work and education eliminates 50% of the workforce. GDP declined 30% in 2 years after the 2021 Taliban returned to power. Famine and economic collapse followed predictably. The pattern is consistent. When civilizations prioritize ideology over pragmatism, when they waste human capital for political reasons, when they sacrifice productive citizens to maintain power structures, those civilizations weaken themselves more effectively than any external enemy could. Egypt was not destroyed by the Hittites or the Sea Peoples or any foreign invasion. Egypt destroyed itself by creating systems that punished competence, rewarded cruelty, and eliminated the flexibility necessary for adaptation and survival. And the warning signs were there from the beginning. Jehudi saw them. Nebaman saw them. Even some judges saw them, though they lacked courage to speak. The chief judge who convicted Hanut Amenhotep Sisi wrote a memoir late in life. Fragments survive. One passage reads, "I have sentenced 217 women for adultery during my career. I believe perhaps 60 were genuinely guilty. The rest, victims of false accusation, political revenge, economic opportunism, or simple malice. Did I know this at the time? In many cases, yes. Did I acquit them? No. Because my duty was not to find truth. My duty was to enforce law, and the law was clear. I do not ask forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I simply want it known that I understood what I was doing. I was not stupid or deceived. I was complicit. I chose order over justice because I believed order was more important. I was wrong. Justice is more important. Always. Because without justice, order becomes tyranny. And tyranny, no matter how stable it appears, will eventually collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Egypt is dying. I contributed to its death. We all did. Amenhotep Sisi died in 1455 BCE at age 67. His memoir was found in his tomb in 1902. It was translated but not widely publicized because it complicated the narrative of ancient Egypt as an enlightened civilization. The question for us living 3,400 years later is simple. Have we learned anything? In 2024, 20 countries maintain laws specifically criminalizing adultery. In 12 of those countries, the penalty applies only to women or applies much more harshly to women than to men. The same gender asymmetry that existed in ancient Egypt persists in modern legal codes. In 8 countries, women can be sentenced to death by stoning for adultery. The method involves bearing the woman to her waistmen, to their chest, and throwing stones until death occurs. This typically takes between 30 minutes and 2 hours. It is torture identical in principle to what Hanut endured, just using different tools. In 15 countries, laws explicitly excuse or reduce penalties for men, who kill female relatives accused of dishonoring families through sexual behavior. These honor-killing provisions descend directly from legal principles first articulated in ancient Egyptian codes. The World Health Organization estimates that 5,000 women per year are killed in honor killings worldwide. The actual number is likely much higher because many cases go unreported or are disguised as accidents. Each killing follows the same logic Hanut faced. A woman violated sexual norms. Her violation threatened family status. Her death was necessary to restore that status. The specifics differ. The pattern remains constant across 3,000 years. But this is not a lecture about women's rights. This is an analysis of how civilizations die. Because the question is not whether we should care about individual victims. The question is whether we can afford to waste human capital on ideology. The question is whether America or any modern nation can remain competitive in a global economy while eliminating portions of its population from productive participation for reasons unrelated to competence. The question is whether civilizations that prioritize control over innovation ideology, over pragmatism, can survive in competition with civilizations that don't. History provides the answer. They cannot. The Soviet Union fell because it prioritized communist ideology over economic reality. Nazi Germany fell because it prioritized racial ideology over scientific reality. Taliban Afghanistan is failing because it prioritizes religious ideology over economic reality. Egypt fell because it prioritized Mayat, the ideological framework of cosmic order, over the practical reality that eliminating half your workforce destroys productivity. The specific ideology varies. The outcome is always the same. Civilizations that waste human capital die, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but inevitably. America has been successful for 248 years, partly because it has been relatively good compared to historical alternatives at not wasting human capital. Not perfect, not even close, but better than the alternatives. Women entering the workforce in the 1940s during World War II increased GDP and contributed to Allied victory. Women entering STEM fields in the 1970s and beyond contributed to American technological dominance. Opening opportunities, regardless of gender, race, or background, has been economically beneficial regardless of ideology. This is not about fairness or equality or any moral framework. This is about survival, about competition, about whether American civilization can maintain dominance in a world where other powers are not handicapping themselves with arbitrary restrictions. The lesson from Egypt is simple. Don't waste human capital. Don't create systems that reward false accusations. Don't sacrifice individuals to maintain power structures. Don't prioritize ideology over competence, because civilizations that do these things die. Not immediately, not obviously, but eventually certainly they die. Jehudi understood this. He wrote in his final chapter, the judges who convicted Hanut believed they were preserving Ma'at. They believed cosmic order required her destruction. They were wrong. Ma'at is not served by injustice. Order is not maintained by cruelty. Civilization is not preserved by destroying its most productive members. Egypt is dying because we chose control over competence. We chose ideology over reality. We chose short-term power over long-term survival. Future generations will look back on this era and ask how we could be so blind, how we could fail to see that systematic oppression weakens the oppressor as much as the oppressed, how we could sacrifice human potential on the altar of tradition and call it divine justice. I do not expect my words to change anything. I write them anyway, because silence is complicity, and I will not die complicit in the lie that what we did was necessary or just or wise. It was none of those things. It was suicide disguised as statecraft. And someday when Egypt is dust in memory, perhaps someone will read this and understand. We killed ourselves. We did it legally, procedurally, in the name of order and tradition. But we killed ourselves as surely as if we had driven swords into our own hearts. We just took longer. We were more cruel. That document, written in 1450 BCE, was discovered in 1924. It was read by scholars who recognized its significance. It was translated, it was published in academic journals, and it changed nothing. Because the pattern continues. Because civilizations do not learn from other civilizations' mistakes. Because each generation believes itself immune to the forces that destroyed its predecessors. But perhaps this time can be different. Not because of moral superiority, not because we are better people than the ancient Egyptians, but because we have their example. We can read Jehudi's words. We can study Nebamun's records. We can examine the economic data and see the correlation between oppressive legal systems and civilizational decline. We can choose not to repeat their mistakes. The choice is simple. Do we prioritize ideology or reality, control or competence, short-term power or long-term survival? Egypt chose control. Egypt chose ideology. Egypt chose power. Egypt is dust. The United States has existed for 248 years. Dynasty 18 lasted 258 years. The math is uncomfortable. The question is not whether we will face challenges. Every civilization faces challenges. The question is whether we will face those challenges with flexibility and pragmatism or with rigidity and ideology. Whether we will value competence regardless of its source, or whether we will waste human capital defending arbitrary hierarchies. Whether we will build systems that self-correct when they make mistakes, or systems that double down on error to avoid admitting fallibility. Egypt chose rigidity. Egypt chose hierarchy. Egypt chose systems that could not admit error. Egypt died. We do not have to. But that requires learning from history. It requires recognizing patterns. It requires understanding that civilizations are not destroyed by external enemies, but by internal contradictions. It requires remembering Hanut Mir, not as a victim to be pitied, but as a casualty of systems that prioritize power over justice, as evidence that legal cruelty has measurable costs, as proof that what we do to the least powerful among us eventually determines our collective fate. She was 22 years old when arrested, 31 when she died. She spent 9 years in bondage for a crime she did not commit. She died on a stone floor carrying waste. She was buried in unmarked sand. Her name was erased. But her story survived. Because Jehudi refused silence. Because Nebamun kept records. Because archaeologists preserved what they found instead of destroying inconvenient truths. And now her story is yours. The question is what you do with it. Do you recognize the pattern when you see it in contemporary systems? Do you question laws that punish without evidence? Do you demand accountability when institutions fail? Do you resist when power justifies cruelty through procedure? Or do you accept that some people are expendable in service of order? Egypt made its choice. The evidence lies buried in sand, cataloged in museums, preserved on papyrus, 3,000 years old. Now you make yours.